Hi there, I'm Mabel Chan, and this is 1 in a Billion, Part 8 of our special series, True Colors. True Colors is about the color of our character, not our skin in times of crisis. How we respond reveals who we are, our values, our beliefs, our bias.
I've heard people make comments like, thanks for bringing the virus over.
Didn't it come from you guys? A passenger told me that I should go back to China.
I've had strangers cough at me.
People move away from me.
Someone spit 3 times towards my direction. I felt so violated.
What you just heard was part of a public service announcement produced by Alan Yang, an Emmy Award-winning writer. It exposes anti-Asian racism since the coronavirus outbreak in America. It's called Fight the Virus, Fight the Bias. How bad is it? By one Civil Rights Coalition's estimate, more than 2,100 incidents have been recorded in 15 weeks. And across the country, anti-Asian harassment, acts of hostility, like physical attacks and verbal assaults, have been rising.
Why you are angry at people that don't look like you. That is something that you have to figure out.
That is Janet Wu, a veteran Boston television reporter and anchor, now with Bloomberg Radio. Janet was referring to a woman, a complete stranger, who repeatedly yelled, "We let too many in," while staring down at her on a crowded subway. That incident actually happened more than 5 years before the pandemic. What that means is that the bias has existed long before the virus.
But the one thing that this pandemic is doing is that it's making us all shut in and look inside. Because I was forced to be more introspective.
In today's episode of True Colors, the bias before the virus, Janet described her own introspection, examining the Chinese roots of her American identity and her own initial bias about people in China who looked very different from her. Here is our conversation. I want to start our conversation about your beautiful essay, The Long Way Home, published in the Boston Magazine in April. In it, you wrote this: "Here, in one of America's most liberal cities, she was yelling to a captive audience that I didn't belong. Tell us what happened."
It was a warm spring day, and I was coming back from Brookline back to Copley Square downtown, and I had boarded a very crowded Green Line train. And it was one of those days where you're frustrated with public transportation because everyone is packed in together. We were sweltering. The train was slow, and this woman started yelling, "We let too many in." And I thought that she was yelling about the conductor having allowed too many people to board the train. And I agreed with her. I was looking the other direction. My eyes were closed for a while as well as I was trying to distract. And she kept yelling, "We let too many in. We let too many in." And I opened my eyes and looked at her, and she was looking at me. Everyone around me were equally shocked, and they did not know what to do. And at that moment, as I wrote down in my essay, it caused me to look at myself and look at my history. And all of a sudden, I guess the best way to describe it is that it's one of the instances in your life when you have a truly out-of-body experience, where you step outside of yourself and you look at yourself and the situation that you were in. And in my case, I was so sad and frustrated about being misunderstood. And as a Chinese American being born in the U.S., I was constantly misunderstood. That was not the first time I've had a racist incident against me. The incident on the train made me think about what it means to belong, what it means to be a Bostonian. We hear, especially during these COVID updates, the mayor talking about and warning against acts of racism because they've definitely been on the rise in Boston. And He has been pointing out, okay, you may be criticizing people, but if you yourself go to the hospital, chances are your doctor, your caregiver, your nurse, your technician was either not born in the U.S. or their parents were not born. Because a very high percentage of healthcare workers are from a different ethnicity.
Right.
They've trained here, or their parents are trained here. So he asked us to be very mindful of that. And for me, it reminded me that so many people are misunderstood. And then this was a part that was not included in the essay, but I myself just went in and asked my friends, has this happened to you? And every single one said yes.
Wow. And was that during this lockdown period after we were told to stay at home and there's heightened fear?
Yes, definitely people had revealed to me incidences that had happened to them prior to this. But since the pandemic has taken hold of the world, the incidents, the racism against Asians has increased, and it's understandable. It is understandable. People are losing jobs. They're losing loved ones. They're losing money. And you want to blame someone. And in the case of this pandemic, the origins of this virus are from Asia. Now, I want to point out, I've been covering pandemic preparation for Bloomberg. And if you look at the history of pandemics, it's not an Asian thing.
That's right.
We had the bubonic plague that was in the Middle Ages in Europe. MERS was from the Middle East. SARS and H1N1 from Asia. But we've had other diseases that emerge all over the world.
Right. And the one in the early 1900s are right here in America. I do want to take you back, Janet, to that day, and in particular this article, because I want to peel off the layers of your feelings then that may be helpful to our listeners who may be struggling as well with their personal history, even as they feel America is home. This is what you said. You said you felt panicked and sensed the crowd was backing up, and you felt bound to this woman as if you were part of a bloody two-car crash. Now, how would you describe this injury in that way? I want to know, where did it hurt?
It hurt on so many levels. And what heightened the hurt is that if I had not been on the train, I could have walked away. I was on a crowded train where I could not even move a foot.
You're trapped.
So I was trapped. I had to confront her as she was yelling at me. She immediately said after, "We should not let so many in." My first thought was, you did not let me in.
Right.
I was here.
Right.
I was born here. So I was not let in. Even my mother was not let in. She was born here. So how can you tell someone who was born here and whose great-grandparents came here, we should not let you in now?
Right.
I wanted to tell her that, but the way she was looking at me and the hatred that she had, and sadly, this is a hatred that we're seeing on a lot of different levels right now.
So what did you want to tell her about your personal history?
The first thing that came into my mind when she was saying to me, "We let too many in," is my frantic effort to explain to her, I'm an American. How can you say that to me? This is all I know. So yes, I channeled back to my childhood because my mother was born in Philadelphia. So we were raised in an English-speaking household with American food and American traditions. I had no Chinese traditions when I was growing up, and I actually am sad about that today. And I joke about it. Wow, if I had gotten all those red envelopes when I was growing up, I would be quite a bit wealthier. I would have more money in the bank. But we didn't do that. We didn't celebrate that because my mother was born in Philadelphia, and so she didn't celebrate those traditions. But there was an irony here. This woman was telling me that I wasn't American and I didn't belong here.
The encounter with that woman made Janet think about the roots of her culture, which also made her feel out of place.
The very first time I did experience China, it was not a pleasant or friendly experience. I was very young. And we were going back to meet my grandmother, knowing that she would probably not be alive much longer. And it was a very rough trip because at this point, 40 years ago, people did not go to China. I kept thinking, oh, this is going to be very familiar to me. I'm going to be around people that look like me for the first time, and there's going to be a joy in that. It was quite the opposite. I felt like a complete stranger there, and even though we all share dark hair, black hair, dark eyes, I could not have been more different than the people there. Nothing felt familiar.
What stood out for you that you remember you were different or they were different? What stood out for you?
What stood out for me is that every single person that I encountered in China, and this is not a negative, it's not their fault, regarded me either with some suspicion or a slight bit of hostility. Because at that point, politically, Westerners were the enemy. So anyone who was from outside of China was considered a bit of an enemy. They were ruined by capitalism. They did not have the same beliefs. They did not have the same political system. And so, of course, there was a great amount of suspicion.
Right.
And I would even say slight hostility at some point. And that's what shocked me because I kept thinking I had already grown up feeling a little bit different. And yes, you talk about the friendliness of seeing other Asians. We would smile at each other. But in truth, I grew up in a place that was 99.9% white. Right. And so I always felt a little bit different. And I had seen little subtle acts of racism on my mother and my father, but they're very easygoing. They would just let it roll off their shoulder. They didn't get angry. I would get angry.
Right, you notice. Well, let's go back to this trip in China. A little bit of context. The year was 1979, so China was just opening up under Deng Xiaoping.
Yes. The slight hostility that we were treated with, I remember my parents saying to us, they gave us all a duffel bag, and we were quite young, and they said, you must pack in this bag everything that you need for 3 months.
Wow.
And you must be responsible for it. We cannot be responsible for you. You are not going to find someone who's going to help you with your luggage. You are not going to find someone who's going to carry it for you. You must pack everything that you need. And if you do not pack your underwear, you will not have underwear for 3 months. And we need to tell you, when we go there, we are not allowed to stay in the few Western hotels that were built. Those are meant for the business people and the few Caucasian people that were coming over to establish businesses. We were in that weird group where, they were suspicious of us.
Well, weren't you suspicious of them as well?
No, because we were young and we were not aware of the political situation.
But just looking at them, how different did they look to you, as you recall, as a young girl?
Yes. So they all dressed at that time still in a very uniform way, very drab colors. They were wearing the Mao suits, and the women generally had their hair in ponytails. They looked like a sea of people. It was still a very kind of unified look, and it was not accepted at that point to stand out. No one wanted to stand out. For us, we stood out just by existing.
One of the most powerful aspects of your essay is how true you stay to your feelings, your gut feelings, as you saw things that you felt as if they were weird, maybe. Well, tell me what you felt when you saw how they acted or how they moved, or what's still fresh on your mind.
This was a realization that was both painful and embarrassing for me, because if I look into my own heart and my own mind, as we all should do, I had to admit to myself that I harbored some hostility and even some racism against the people of my heritage. And what you are referring to and what I wrote about is when I went to China, I remember having moments of disgust for what I was seeing, because back then, in the 70s and 80s, people would spit by habit. That has only decreased recently. There would be spittoons everywhere, and people would just be spitting constantly. And I was horrified and disgusted by this because we didn't know what to expect there. My mother had never been to China. My father had left as a very young person himself, so they were not going to tell us, oh, when you go to China, there are going to be these things that people are doing that are going to frighten you, perhaps disgust you, the way people were eating, how they were shouting. And I understand it now. At that point, food was very scarce. People had to fight for their own existence. China's such a crowded place, so of course they're jockeying with each other. They're fighting to get to the first in line and everything. This was not what I understood. And so I looked down on them for that. If there was the line for a store and people were fighting and pushing each other out of the way to get there, I did not understand it because I had been raised with this privilege where you did not have to struggle for your mere existence.
What is your state of mind now confronting COVID as a threat to your own personal safety and COVID as a virus as a pretext for hate crime?
I'm scared. I am not so much scared for myself because I do believe that I am lucky to live in a fairly progressive city with a lot of amazingly intellectual and open-minded residents and friends. But I watch what's happening around the country. And I see reports every day of someone being screamed at. We saw a report of a woman actually punched and pushed to the floor. And I had a Japanese friend recently. Someone yelled at her in a grocery store and she wanted to yell back, "I'm not even Chinese. Why are you telling me to get over there and, this virus is my fault?" So I am scared and I'm worried. And although this particular issue is framed within ethnic differences and there's some escalation there, we're seeing in general that this crisis is fraying everyone's nerves. It's making everyone raw. And I think that there's a danger to that. We have to be even more careful about taking a deep breath, taking a step back and thinking, well, what are the things that we can do to unite and constantly make the world a better place for all of us on every different level rather than to create conflict?
Well, this is beautiful lead into my next questions, and that is about being Asians in America, right? We already have been always perceived as this perpetual foreigner. Even as many people have risen to prominent positions of power and fame, such as yourself. You were a TV anchor for NBC News here in Boston when it happened, and now it's with Bloomberg TV. I mean, what do you think that you and others who have high-profile careers or who have a calling to confront racism, what can be done to combat racism right now against Asians?
I do think that we are making progress. 5 years ago, when the woman was yelling at me, no one really stepped forward to say anything because I think they were shocked. They didn't know what to do, so they ignored it. But when I saw the other racist incident that I wrote about, where a man in his 30s or 40s was yelling at a much older Chinese woman as she was trying to get around him with her shopping cart, and he started yelling at her and telling her to go back to Hong Kong. At that point, people did yell back at him.
Oh, really? What did they say?
They said, well, sit down, shut up, you're being a racist, you're racist. Mabel, I think one of the reasons why people were moved to speak up is that in the last 5 years, our country has been profoundly changed. And that has to do with the larger political system, where we have seen other acts of discrimination that has sensitized people to the dangers of what is going on.
Well, also, should we add that Asians have also begun to rise in their visibility in Hollywood, for example? In films like Crazy Rich Asians and many other films that are giving roles to Asians where they were denied before. So the rise in their visibility and power and maybe our collective voice is now beginning to run into another storm, and that is this virus. And so it's a perfect storm for us to be targeted, right?
Right. And you are correct about the changes. And that's why I'm not surprised that in just a short period of time, a few years, people have changed in how they view Asians. Absolutely.
During this time when we're all confronting COVID, I wonder what role can we play collectively, or have you seen that we should continue to play?
It's a very tough time right now because people are upset. I think they are also weary with the media. Someone just posted, we should just shut all the media off and our problems would go away. And I felt the same sort of anger and embarrassment and frustration. The truth is that science, reality, and the truth is how we progress. And I have decided that the most effective way to do this is with individual conversations. And they take time. One thing that I've been doing lately is there's a lot of suspicion about not only the origins of the virus, but what we are doing to fight it. And I've been saying to people, okay, this is something that is new for everyone. Are we going to get it 100% right? No. But I believe in the researchers and the scientists, and I believe in what they're telling us. Now back to China, the hostility. I have had some painful conversations with Asians, and I said, we have to acknowledge that we play a role in this, and this can't happen again. And one thing that I've been trying to do is really educate people on the dangers of wet markets. I feel that this is my duty.
This is such a great insight in how you want to play a role. Is so effective, and particularly because you are a journalist and you've been, how long have you been a journalist now in TV?
So I have been a journalist now for 25 years.
All right, rocking strong.
Yes, it's, I mean, it's amazing. Yes. And it's funny. Like you, I didn't intend to go into TV. I thought I would be a magazine writer. But early on, I was actually visiting my sister and brother-in-law, who you know, in California. They were at Stanford, and I was coming back from my first trip from Asia, just out of graduate school, and I needed a job, and I just wandered into a small television station to drop off a resume, and they hired me right there.
Oh, wow. This was great.
And then I thought, oh, I'll just do this for a little while. I'm really too short for television. And then it just happened along and along. And I'm extremely grateful because television is not an easy business, as you know, and it can be extremely fickle and demanding. I'm very lucky to be at Bloomberg because the horizons for this company are so wide. Our work has doubled because we're covering the business response. Health is tied to finance, and health, of course, is tied to all of our well-being. And so it's been complex, but it's been exciting at the same time.
I can feel your excitement, and I'm so happy for you. As I was listening to you, I was thinking back in those days when I was in TV, and that kind of drive and satisfaction is very palpitating. If there's a message you want to say as a Chinese-American journalist, what is it to the world right now? Blame game going on, tension is high, our president is blaming China and China is blaming us.
Blame has never been linked to progress, ever. So a true leader, whether they are actually leading a large group of people or leading in a small group of friends, a leader looks ahead and is innovative, understanding, has their eyes open, assesses the challenges and meets them. They find solutions. They don't blame. Blame sticks you in a place of which you never get out.
And blame also basically make us all feel like victim when we have so much power in our own storytelling to redefine who we are, reaffirm who we are, even at that moment of being challenged. As we know, and very well, the saying by Eleanor Roosevelt, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent.
Very true. very true. Although people will try, and your job is to not let them.
Thank you, Janet. Janet Wu of Bloomberg Business News. In our next episode of True Colors, for better and for worse.
Having grown up in the United States and seeing that jobs that are, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. actually do exist, it's possible to have time to spend with your kids. I think that's something that's much harder to achieve in China when it comes to raising a family and when it comes to having more personal and family time.
That is David Wang, a Chinese-American entrepreneur who moved to Shanghai from Boston with his wife, who grew up in Shenzhen. That is our next episode of True Colors, for better and for worse, in 2 weeks. 1 in a billion is
Brian Latwinowicz,
Yvette Yu, Maggie Shi,
Leah Yen Jarrett.
And our lovely theme song is composed by Brad McCarthy. Let us know if you want to join our team of volunteers, help us plan events, pitch a story. Just go to our website, oneinaBillionVoices.org, and find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.